Okay. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is David Rayla, Hearing Officer, San Francisco Public Works. Nathan Aurelius is the clerk for this hearing. This hearing is being recorded via Zoom and will be available afterwards through a link on the San Francisco Public Works website, sfpublicworks.org, and YouTube. As this is a virtual hearing, there is no sign-in sheet. So if you would like to receive information about the result of this hearing, please send an email to the email address listed to the hearing notice. This public hearing is being held to consider 3 items. Hearing order 205655 to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issue for illegal pruning for one street tree at 1757 18th Avenue. Number 2, hearing order 205657 to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for illegal pruning for 133 at DSN 255 Clayton Street. And finally, hearing order 205668 to consider revisions to the public water regulations implementing the requirement of San Francisco Public Works Code Article 27 containing public work, order number 188097. My job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing items, listen to your testimonies, and help our Director of Public Works make determinations. I will be not making any decisions today. Instead, I will forward the findings from this hearing and make my recommendations to the Director. He will make the final determinations. When the Director's determinations are made, the department will notify you of them. If you have provided contact information, I believe we have all of that on file. The hearing will proceed as follows. I will ask the public works staff, in this case, I believe is Mr. Buck from Bureau of Urban Forestry. He will speak first and present the case and give us an overview as well as insight in a particular case. Then I will allow the property owner or tenant or applicant to speak. Then any member of the public or witness who wishes to speak. Then the department, if the department has any comments. And finally, again, the property owner, if the property owner has any rebuttal to what anybody has said. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to speak. The clerk will monitor the time for all speakers and will indicate when the speaker has 30 seconds left. Now, the initial entity is going to speak, which is public works staff, since it's going to kind of introduce the procedure and all that. It's going to take a little bit more than 5 minutes, I reckon. So that's okay. But any other person after that is going to be 5 minutes, including the department as well. If you are party to this proceeding, I will call on you to speak. If you would like to use visual materials in your presentation, please let me know before you speak. You will then have the standard 5 minutes to provide your comments. If you are a member of the public or witness who want to speak, wait for me to call for public comments, then use Zoom, raise your hand, which is somewhere on the screen, I believe. Feature. If you're on a computer, to put yourself in a queue to speak. If you're a dialing on your phone, to raise your hand, you dial *9 to indicate that you're raising your hand. When it is your turn to speak, I will recognize you. If on your phone and you're muted, press *6 to unmute yourself. If you would like to use visual materials in the presentation, let me know, or series, which also said earlier, to write all technical questions to her. You will then have the standard 5 minutes for your comments. Comments and questions should be addressed to me only and not the department or the applicant. If you cannot finish your comments within the allotted time, you may submit written testimony to me by the end of this hearing. If I feel that a question is warranted, I will ask that question. After all comments are completed, I will close the item. All right. Finally, we will begin the hearing. Hearing order 205655. Can I have public works staff make his presentation, please?
Good evening, hearing officer David Rayla and our clerk Cerise Waiters. And Cerise, I just want to confirm that you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Thank you.
Sorry, Cerise, I thought that Nathan was clerk, but obviously you are correction on the record.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you both. I just wanted to confirm that before I start speaking. So yeah, my name is Chris Buck, and I'm the urban forester for San Francisco Public Works Bureau of Urban Forestry. And before I dive in, essentially I oversee a small group of about 6 urban forestry inspectors who work for Public Works Bureau of Urban Forestry. And one of the many things that our team does is look at where there might have been a violation of our urban forestry ordinance, Article 16 of the Public Works Code. But we do a lot more than just enforce infractions of our code. There's construction development that our inspectors are looking at. We work with developers when they plant new trees in front of homes. And we're also inspecting trees throughout the city as part of Street Tree SF. So that's a little bit more about what we're doing. We're not just out there looking to issue fines to property owners. I have a lot of visuals today, so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. I think we'll find that more visually interesting. Let me bring this to current slide from the beginning. Great. And we're now sharing the screen. So thank you for attending this hearing. I'm going to go over a lot of information that's in our urban forestry ordinance, and it'll apply to both of our tree cases today. So as the hearing officer explained, we'll have a lot of information up front, but then when we get to the second case, we won't go through all of it again. We won't repeat all that. But stepping back a bit, Public Works has the urban forestry ordinance known as Article 16 of the Public Works Code, where it outlines in section 808 that the protection of trees and landscape materials required, and that injury to or destruction of trees is prohibited. And it states that it shall be unlawful for any person to intentionally, maliciously, or through gross negligence injure or destroy a street tree, any tree on city property, a significant tree, a landmark tree. It also states that a removal application is required if you're seeking to remove a tree. Regarding section 806, 3A, if someone's desiring the removal of a tree, a permit's required. We don't have any illegal removals to deal with today, so we're going to skip through that. Also, during construction work, we don't have cases involving that today, so we'll move through this a little bit quickly. But during construction, street trees need to be protected as well. Now, in our code, we do define what injure or injury means, and it really lists essentially an encyclopedia almost of all the various ways that trees may be injured or damaged, again, intentionally or unintentionally. But at the very bottom, you'll see we bolded in red that pruning, which in and of itself will cause or will kill or cause a tree to decline, and then semicolon, or severing of all or part of a tree. So a tree does not need to die from the result of the excessive or illegal pruning. It's actually even just severing of all or part of a tree. So I just want to be clear, it does mention death of the tree, but that's not the requirement we're looking to meet here. And we'll explain why that is. So best management practices in tree maintenance and tree care, our industry is referred to as arboriculture. which is the culture or care of trees. So the general guidelines are to not remove more than 25% of the tree canopy each year, not removing 25% of the foliage on a branch. This stresses the tree and may produce weakly attached branches the following year. Also, this next part is very instrumental in understanding our guidelines. Do not cut back to a branch that is less than 1/3 or 1/2 the size of the main branch. It's important to selectively remove branches throughout the tree, not just the lowest branches. Removing the lowest branches is limbing up, which creates lion tailing. Lower branches also help the vigor of the tree, and it's especially important in conifers. This is an example of topping or excessive pruning. This is something we don't want to see. These were evergreen species, and all of the branches and canopy were removed, creating stubs. Now, one of the things that can be misleading to the public is that when a tree is excessively pruned or sort of haphazardly cut in half, there's a stress response, and the tree actually needs those leaves to carry out photosynthesis. And so it's a real shock to the tree. And there are buds that are underneath the bark surface, which are triggered during stress events. So when you see a flush of new growth, it's not a sign that you have a very healthy tree. It's actually a stress response. The tree literally is putting out new leaves, growing new leaves so they can carry on photosynthesis. Now, when trees are topped or excessively pruned repeatedly, how does it put out those new leaves? Well, it has energy, stored energy throughout the bark and the roots of the tree. So it draws on that stored energy to push out those new leaves. If it's done repeatedly, the tree actually has no energy reserves and it has no mechanism to put out new leaves. One other challenge after a tree has been topped, 10 years later, the resprouted limbs resemble something like this. And you can almost pick a branch that might fall off in the next wind. These are all very weakly attached, superficially attached, what we call as epicormic, or attached on the very surface of the tree. It doesn't have the original growth connecting it to the main stem. Also, the improper pruning serves as an entry point for other pathogens, insects and pathogens, viruses, funguses. Also, the main heartwood of those stems actually will begin to decay. And as you can see here, the original wood that existed prior to damage is no longer growing and degrades. And then wood that is decayed actually has no strength or load-bearing strength, and that causes the tree or branches to fail. Now, topping is not the same pruning technique as pollarding. Pollarding can be confusing, but it was actually done by indigenous folks for millennia. But in France, they did it outside classical buildings, and in front of City Hall here in San Francisco, there are some pollarded trees, and we also do that along California Street. When you pollard a tree, what you're doing is you are essentially topping the tree at one time in one instance when the tree is young, but each year after that, you're only pruning off the resulting sprouts. That forms these sort of calloused fists, which compartmentalize any future decay. So it's a lot different. You might even call it a specialty type of pruning. We generally try not to do that in the city, but you will see that across the city, and that can be confusing as well. Regarding power lines, most of the lines overhead, even though you should treat them all as live wires, most of them are phone and cable or service drops, and are essentially designed to deal with some certain amount of strain and abrasion. Now, if there's undue strain or abrasion, that could be an issue. But the image on the right shows that in many communities, you really just let the trees grow. Many of those lines are just phone and cable. It's statistically very rare to have disruptions to electrical service to your home or to phone and cable due to a tree issue. On the left, we're looking at high voltage lines on the very top set of the pole. And those lines are pruned. Clearance is obtained by PG&E as required by law by the PUC each year. And that's something that PG&E worries about, not the property owner. Now, big picture, in 2017, San Francisco became responsible for maintaining all of the sidewalk trees. And this is something that still may be confusing to the public, because prior to 2017, property owners, 2/3 of property owners were responsible for pruning trees outside their homes. But as of 2017, we have a street tree census now. We're aware of all the trees in the city, and we have a strategic and systematic approach to how we prune those trees. And really what we're focused on this first round of pruning is to focus on the worst first. We're looking at the areas of the city where we have the largest number of trees in the largest size that pose the greatest potential risk. And we're doing maintenance in those areas of the city first. We've done maintenance throughout the city, but we do need to focus our attention on where the most trees are first. That's, again, referred to as Street Tree SF in San Francisco. Let's see. This is what that looks like in progress. We had a tree up on Upper Portola that was in the process of potentially failing. So there are times when we bring out heavy equipment to do this work, and we try to put up signs so that when we're out there, the public gets used to the city doing the maintenance. And that's really the goal here, is getting the public to understand the city really is in the process of maintaining all of the street trees in San Francisco. Some of that work is done by in-house city tree crews, and a large amount of that is also done by contractors that enter a competitive contracting bid with Public Works. So again, we do have a tree pruning schedule for the city, and folks can zoom in and check out their neighborhood or their block to see when they're scheduled. We are doing more and more outreach about the maintenance of street trees and sidewalk when the sidewalk is damaged by tree roots, by trees that are maintained by the city. And we're really trying to encourage folks just not to prune the trees in front of their own homes. It's going to take a while for sure. There's a lot of outreach to do. I also wanted to just mention that in response to these fines, we understand the fine amount can seem quite a bit more if you think about when we get a parking ticket and we feel like we're so frustrated. We understand the tree fines are expensive. We'll explain why that is. But we do offer a street tree care class, and when attended, we have a reduction schedule where the fine amount may be reduced for illegal pruning. The overall goal is to really teach about the benefits of trees, the benefits of proper tree pruning. There is a class fee, $197, that goes to our Adopt a Tree Fund, but this may be something that either the hearing officer or director of public works recommends for individual cases. So I want to thank everyone for their patience to this point. We'll finally begin the next, the item that was called Order 205655. This was the appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for the illegal pruning of one street tree adjacent to 1757 18th Avenue. The fine levied for the illegal pruning in this case was $4,300. Again, the presentation will be a little bit shorter now that we're going into the specific cases. The subject tree in front of this property is a Tristania tree. The Latin name or scientific name is Tristaniopsis larina. It's native to Australia. It's an evergreen species. So this is a before image. We like to use Google. It's a great tool to just look at what the conditions were like somewhat recently before the tree was pruned. Now, during a routine inspection or through a service request from the public, we are notified in any number of different ways. It could be that our urban forestry inspector, who's a certified arborist, happened to be on that block, or they're driving by, or we get a call from a public. So there's a number of different ways in which Public Works receives notice that a tree has been excessively pruned. In this case, the subject tree had all branches and foliage removed from the tree. And it actually helps to see the tree in the background, which shows what the tree should still look like. So when we go back to discussing the arboriculture standards for tree pruning, one of those key, just as a reminder, one of those key guidelines is to not remove more than 25% of the canopy within a single growing year. The reason for that is the stress that it causes the tree. Now, when a tree is excessively pruned in this way, it's not just a minor stress, it's a major stress. We have large stub cuts. Some of these are range from 2 to up to perhaps 4, maybe even 5 inches in diameter. So very large stubs. Those will remain open to insects as a pathway to insects, decay, and potentially disease long-term. Again, you can see examples of similar species in the background. Another thing to note, in general, when a property owner has hired someone to perform work, we often will redirect fines or really try to help the property owner by advising them to seek reimbursement from the contractor who performed the work. This is an example where not only were there stub cuts made, which is damaging, but also the bark was allowed to sort of peel back on the edge of the stem, which adds additional injuries to the topping cut. So this just demonstrates that this is clearly not a trained professional who is performing this work. Also, our process for determining the amount of the fine, our code requires that we issue a fine for either the standard in lieu fee, which is just under $2,000. It's $2,193, I believe, this fiscal year. That amount is based on the cost to the city to purchase, plant, water, and maintain a tree for 3 years, which is how long it takes to establish a street tree. When a tree is larger like this one, we do a landscape appraisal because we have a sense that it's probably the diminished value caused by the topping is greater than the minimum in lieu fee of $2,193. So in this particular case, our inspector did perform a landscape appraisal. There's a lot of training that needs to take place in order to be able to perform such a landscape appraisal. And there's very specific ways and rules that we have to adhere to perform an appraisal. But on line item 17, this shows that prior to topping, the value of the tree was estimated to be nearly $9,500. Following the topping, the diminishment in value, the tree is now considered at a appraisal of $5,173. So the difference is when you round up to the nearest $100, it's $4,300. And that's just to show kind of behind the scenes the amount of work that's taking place to follow our code and do it consistently. So because the minimum fine amount was greater than the minimum in lieu fee, again, the code says that we need to issue the fine, whichever is the greater of the two. And just to reiterate, there's so many benefits that trees provide in San Francisco. There's ecological, social, economic, environmental. And so, when you look at existing trees, the city really, these trees are assets, just like a streetlight pole would be an asset. If someone had vandalized a streetlight pole, we can kind of think of that as like, well, that would clearly be vandalism. So when folks hop up in the tree and cut them without a professional or by themselves, it really is diminishing the value of this asset. And more, the city really depends on these trees to deliver environmental benefits. We call those ecosystem services. So intercepting stormwater in the winter, providing habitat, sequestering carbon, reducing stormwater runoff. So again, I want to thank everyone for being patient, but just wanted to explain the background on this and respectfully we confirmed that the tree had been excessively pruned, and so our inspector did issue the fine to be consistent with how we've handled similar cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. I will ask the property owner or appellant to speak next. Is he or she in attendance?
Yes, they are. Mr. Ha, James? Can you unmute yourself?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Yes.
Did
Hello.
you have a presentation to make? Did you need to share your screen or no?
I think most of the pictures I sent was in the previous email when I
Okay.
responded to you guys.
Nope, no problem. Okay.
Yeah.
I do have that email in front of me, Mr. Hutt.
So I think there was a couple of PDFs or pictures that were attached. I just mainly wanted to appeal the case because, you know, we had taken care of this tree for the past 20 years. We've lived in this neighborhood for a very long time. We've never desired it to kind of prune the tree the way that it was. You know, there were branches that were overhanging, and there's a picture that we had sent. The same picture that's in the email was the one that we had sent to a company that we had found via Yelp on 4th of July. And it was just illustrating some of the branches that were hanging. We had created a service ticket just to ask for them to trim those branches, and they had responded with the understanding that they would only just trim a couple of the branches, especially the ones that were overhanging and falling onto, that looked like they were going to fall onto parked cars. You know, we had arranged an appointment to be at 1:30 p.m. that day, and I had left the house at 12:30. You know, they came to our house before I even came back, and the tree was already kind of removed the way that it appears now. Apparently 6 men came in at the time and just kind of went into it, and then the result of it was what I had when I came back. And so it was kind of hard for us to kind of control that. And my biggest concern is just on top of that, there's just a company that's coming around advertising that they can trim trees and then just clipping them incorrectly based off of no requests that people are asking.
Thank you. Would the department would like to respond to the owner's comment?
Oh, thank you. It's Chris Buck again with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. No, I really appreciate the feedback from the property owner and the history of maintenance. I guess my only question would be if we know the name of that contractor, the city can help reach out to them to, you know, remind them about the rules regulating the maintenance of trees in our arboriculture industry. One thing that may also happen is that any resulting fine amount, often it's really up to the property owner to pursue the issue as a consumer protection issue with the contractor who performed the work. But it would be helpful to know if you do know the name of the company so that we can help protect the public and our trees. Thank you. And I appreciate, it's unfortunate to have to meet this way. You know, I appreciate the feedback that you provided.
Thank you.
I think the company's name is attached to the screenshot, but it was sent Santos Hauling. I think the person whose name is there is Roberto S. Phone number and everything's attached via Yelp too, so it'll be available for you to reach out to them if you want.
All right, thank you. Well, as is often the case in you know, this kind of single-family residence tree fine situations, I hear a lot that you know, the owners just want to do basically maintenance of their property and the adjacent terrain, and run afoul of laws and regulations that most often they're not even aware of. So my follow-up question would be to the public, when they feel the need or they have to prune a tree, and I guess this is a question for Ms. Buck. What would be the recommended avenue? Because it sounds like going to Yelp for a service is something that I would do as well, or anybody would do. I did that for a number of times. So I guess to get more specific first is there a requirement from the city, just as you were doing a repiping project in your house or roofing or replacing windows? Is there a requirement to hire a insured, bonded, licensed arborist to take care of the streets?
Thank you, hearing officer. Good follow-up question. So there is the key thing that the public should take away is to call 311, which is San Francisco's kind of all-in-one, if you're trying to report illegal dumping or a blocked driveway, or have questions and you're looking for city services in San Francisco, the best bet or default would be to call 311 just to find out who's responsible for maintaining street trees. So 311 is what we recommend. In fact, if someone's attended that tree care class, we repeat that over and over again. If you have a concern about the tree, absolutely, we want to hear about that so we can help address it. So calling 311, getting on the Public Works website, we have information there. The other thing is, unfortunately, the tree contractors who perform tree work in San Francisco in the public right of way shouldn't be without permission. So that's one reason why our bureau is going to want to reach out to contractors who are doing this work, because they should not be performing that work without specific permission from Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. So the tree contractor would actually need an email from our bureau stating that we've met on site, we've reviewed the scope of work, and let's say, for example, someone wanted to paint their house and they really needed to get scaffolding up, and there's a tree with a lot of foliage right up against the house, and our schedule is not bringing us out there for 2 years, we will arrange with a property owner to review that scope of work and pre-approve it through an email. In extreme examples, there are cases where a property owner could also, quote unquote, opt out of having the city maintain their tree, but that's a very rare example. So it's the key takeaway here is to call 311. Any tree contractors who are qualified to perform tree work need to have a state contractor's license, specifically for tree care and or landscaping that has a tree care rider or qualification on that. So one of the challenges for this case would be that it's really a consumer protection issue. Now, the state of California licensing board has resources for property owners who've hired someone and that work has gone south. And so, that's, unfortunately, this is after the fact, but that's what we'd recommend, is that the property owner, any remaining portion of this fine, the property owner really pursue the issue with the contractor they hired. But in the meantime, with Street Tree SF, we now have the responsibility for all street trees. And we do keep our eyes out for people who are out there touching these street trees. And we have a specific list of contractors who are approved to do work specifically for public works. So I just wanted to assure the public we are working hard to do that. It is tough to police every single person out there, particularly a hauling company, which may not have that qualification. Thank you.
Thank you. Would the owner have any comment to respond to that, or anything else?
No, I mean, I think it was very straightforward. Very, I agree with everything that was kind of presented. And, we kind of always had the intention to kind of preserve that tree and keep it healthy as well too. So just, really unfortunate that that's kind of what happened to it.
Yeah, I mean, I, I, I agree. Um, it's, it's not, it's like a double whammy, you know. You get home back home with the expectation that the work is done right, and you get your beautiful tree butchered, because that's what it is from the picture. It's pretty dramatic, and plus you get the city knocking on the door.
Right.
So sympathies on that. But uh, that's the way it happens sometimes. All right. Well, I don't have any other additional question regarding this item. So if there's no other comment from the public or department or the owner, I will move on and close this item and move to the next, which is order. There it is. 205657, which is the tree adjacent to 55 Clayton Street. If
Thank you.
Mr. Buckley, yes.
Yep, thank you. Chris Buck with the Bureau of Urban Forestry. And I will go back to sharing screen again. Let's do from current slide. And just want to confirm to our clerk if the image of the PowerPoint is visible again.
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. And I think in a moment it'll let me advance. There we go. So this next order, 205657, is to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for illegal pruning of one street tree adjacent to 55 Clayton Street. The fine levied for the legal pruning in this case is $2,193. Again, I took a lot of photos off of Google Street View. From having been involved with these hearings over the years, I know it's really helpful to show images courtesy of Google that kind of show the history of the site. I think it really helps. It'll reduce the amount of time that the property owner, is trying to explain, the history of maintenance of a tree, and it can be quite informative to just look at these images. So I'll come back to some of them that I found, because we do want the property owners to understand that we're well aware of the challenges of a property owner who's been maintaining a tree for decades, and that responsibility shifts back to the city. And we do issue warnings. We've done outreach in various ways. We wish we could reach out to everyone before trees get excessively pruned. We're just not, it's just not quite possible. So I just want to, the property owners to understand we're coming from a place of needing to really protect these trees, but we're much more interested in education and debriefing once something has occurred to a street tree. Because we definitely believe in the carrot, education and outreach, and not punitive measures unless it's absolutely necessary. So we looked at a Google Street View image from 2014 in May. There are power lines. I'll be talking about all these lines quite a bit for this case, but this is the image of the tree as our urban forestry inspector came across it earlier this year. The species is a broadleaf evergreen. It's a magnolia. And so magnolia, they're native to our country in the United States, the southern states, but it can grow in a wide range of areas in this country. Definitely, we have a lot of these in San Francisco. Ringing Dolores Park is one example along Dolores Street. So a magnolia, broadleaf evergreen, it's not deciduous, so typically have trees, it'll have leaves retained throughout the year. This is after we found the tree. Again, when we talk about our pruning guidelines established in our industry, the arboriculture industry, tree care industry, we recommend, not we, but the industry recommends that no more than 25% of the tree is pruned. So in this case, you know, I would say this is probably 90% of the actual foliage is removed, leaving large stub cuts. And you can even see some of these twigs that have died back a bit. So looking at the images up close, again, you can see these lighter colored leaves, and those are the new leaves that are sprouting out as part of that stress response, because the tree, again, needs all those leaves to carry out photosynthesis. So I did go back into Google Street View just to look at kind of the history of pruning of this tree. Again, just both to show the property owner that we can see on Google kind of these attempts to keep it out of all these overhead lines, and near successes and near misses in those attempts over the years. This image is taken from October of 2017. This image was taken, this is one of the most recent images on Google Street View, showing that the top actually had quote unquote regrown. But again, the structure is becoming awkward, which is what happens when trees are excessively pruned. In August 2015, you know, this is like close in terms of trying to retain more leaves, more of the secondary branches, but this is still we would consider this excessively pruned, you know, too much lollipopping or attempts at topiary. Again, we understand there's low voltage lines, there's a phone and cable, and then service drops to the homes. But again, these lines, the service drops from the lines over the road to the homes typically can handle a lot of strain and abrasion. It's really when it's undue strain or abrasion where you would actually experience any kind of disruption in service. It's just having being involved with managing 125,000 street trees, it's just not statistically an issue that we deal with, but the perception of the issue is what is so strong. You know, anytime there's a fire or an outage, the thought is, you know, look out front and say, okay, is my tree or these lines in danger? So we understand it, but it's really more one of perception than an actual threat in our urban environment. So these are again after photos when we found the tree. Again, so many of those leaves have been removed, and these are topping heading cuts, not back to smaller secondary branches. One thing that's helpful is to also look at how other trees, the same species, have been managed on the block. So our subject tree is downhill on the left. Now there's another magnolia on the block, and this is an image from May of 2014 where this tree was pruned, likely by that adjacent property owner, not excessively, kind of, you know, they've pruned it, but they've made some heading cuts, but the cuts they've made are much smaller in diameter. So what's interesting is to note that the tree a few years later still has its main scaffold branches, its main stems, its main secondary branches, and it's filling back out again. And so the point in kind of showing this is that trees that are excessively pruned create additional maintenance challenges, whereas trees that are pruned a little more judiciously and allowing more of the natural structure and shape of the tree to exist, they're actually easier to maintain longer term. And then another note about the actual overhead lines that we see on this side of the street. So the very top set of lines are connected to the top of the horizontal pole with these large brown ceramic insulators. Those are high voltage lines. Anything that touch those lines that is also touching the ground will conduct electricity. And so the goal of PG&E, the PUC, and certainly Public Works is not to allow vegetation to touch those top set of wires. About 6 to 8 feet below that are the secondary low voltage wires. Again, these are typically insulated and foliage can have some contact with those, quite a bit of contact. And it's PG&E that would really focus on any concerns. PG&E is required by law to maintain a multi-million-dollar vegetation management program that they do, and that's audited by the PUC annually. So PG&E and their tree contractors individually inspect every property and tree in the entire city every year by law. And so most of the time you don't see them do work because they don't need to. So those are the secondary power lines. And then there's service drops that connect from there to the home. And lower down on the pole, below the level of the street light, are your phone, typically phone and cable and communication lines. Again, those can be right in there. We often tell the public, let the tree hide those unsightly wires. You don't need to be forced to stare at a lot of that. Let the canopy cover those up. So when you're looking out your window, you're not staring at those. So again, just showing that we see the challenges that the owner's been trying to maintain this tree below the level of the wires, but the tree really should be allowed to grow out and become taller. And when it starts to really fill out, PG&E will be the ones to prune away from the secondary lines. All these lower lines can be within the canopy. That said, we did, to be consistent with how we've handled similar cases, our urban forestry inspector confirmed that it met the industry standards for a tree that was not pruned to standard, essentially what we consider excessively or illegally pruned in San Francisco. So to be consistent with how we've handled similar cases, the inspector issued the fine for the minimum of the two fines. The in lieu fee of $2,193 or the loss in the appraised value. In this particular case, a lot more secondary branches were retained. And so that fine amount is less than the one that we covered previously. So that's why the fine amount is our basic in lieu fee. That's about all I have to present here. Again, we recommend that folks call 311. And now that Street Tree SF is maintaining trees across the city, that the city be allowed to prune the trees across the city. And I believe that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. I will now move on to the property owner or appellant.
Yes, we have Mr. Yip. Just one moment. I'm going to promote him to a panelist and he would like to share his screen. You will need to go ahead and unmute once again, please.
Hello.
Okay, hold on. I think I promoted the other. You're signed in on two different devices. Let me. Can you unmute on your other device, please? Okay, so
You don't have to look at my video, right?
there you go.
Can you-
There you go. Now I can hear you.
Okay, good.
That's fine.
Hi, my name is Phyllis. We have been the homeowner of this tree for the past 10 years. And yes, the tree grows extremely, very fast. In fact, the time that we have to prune the tree, it was touching the highest point of the pole, the electrical pole. And also, my house has a lot of mosquitoes. the mosquito, they just love this tree because we have a sewage. As I compile a lot of information and send it along with this document, the mosquito, they just love to be there and then get into our house. And throughout the, I already sent you the photo of my daughter, how we were all got bitten by the mosquito. So over the year, I found out that if we have called someone to prune the tree to get rid of some of the leaves, it helps a lot because in September time, the whole mosquito, they just like stay on those big leaves tree and maybe it has some water for them. I have no idea. So in fact, in 2014, we have the city people come over to evaluate our home. Why we have so many mosquitoes? And they collect some dead mosquito and we never heard from them again. But throughout the year, that's how I found. The tree grows so fast and every few years we have to have someone to prune the tree, get some light, sunshine through the tree, then it kind of helps. And I do find out that. So this year, we hide the lights. Again, we always hide the same people to prune the tree and they are licensed a pruning tree. So that is what happened this year. And yeah, so they say that they will prune to the standard, the required standard. And as of today, the tree looks very healthy. And I just sent you guys a picture that I have taken a few days ago. And I really would like you to see, look at the current situation of the tree.
Yeah, so it's Kelvin here. So I look at the first case and listen to what you guys told us maybe a minute or two ago. So my comment is the first time we have to look for someone to prune the tree, it was exactly because of the PG&E issue. The tree was actually hitting a power line and my house would be on and off with electricity. So they actually came and said, hey, wait a minute, the tree is doing that. So let us do something about that. So
No.
somehow they fixed that. That's one.
No, hold on.
But that's not important.
I did call the 311. They told me that I did call the 311. This time, they told me that I should call PG&E. Or if it's a emergency issue, I should call 911. So I really don't think it's a 911 issue. And I always we have been maintaining the tree. So that's why I called the same guy. And I send you guys the invoice too, along with this document. So I paid $300 to prune the tree. So we did not intend to damage the tree or anything or injure the tree. In fact, I love the tree. It's just that we do have mosquito. I would like to prune it so it less dense the tree because it grows very fast. And the picture you guys showing, it was last year. No, it was this year. But look at just a few months later, today's tree. It's all grown up again. And it's beautiful tree.
But all that is okay. I mean, I'm sure you don't care much about that. What I want to know is if I have already hired a licensed company to do that, and they seem to have done a great job last time. So how can I think earlier for the last case, you guys are saying that I can actually find the department of the Chris department to come out and arrange with whoever is going to prune the tree, make sure that it's pre-approved before they actually do it. Or maybe nowadays, the best thing is to do what 311 said. Just leave them alone until the city comes. Or if there's a fire, call 911, something like that, right? Is that how to proceed?
And also, I called 311. They say that they will come 5 years later.
I checked that.
Yeah, we checked that.
They said there's a schedule.
There's a schedule for our area, which is 3 years later. I called last year.
30 seconds.
Yeah, I think Chris also showed a map, right? Maybe I can Google that. Yeah.
So in our case, the tree was touching the highest power point.
So maybe some advice more than anything. Yeah. So I think that's all I have. Of course, if
Yeah,
you can
and-
do it, don't find me.
Yeah, I mean, it took me quite some time to compile the whole documents to you guys. And I mean, that was my best effort to explain to you why we have to
you.
do what we did. And if there's anything wrong that we did, and please advise us, how should we go forward? You know, because the tree is growing so fast now, it's like, it's healthy, everything. And
Thank
also,
you.
this mosquito issue
your
really
time is
bothers
up.
me.
I think your
I
time is
just want to say, first of all, I want to make sure that I'm saying your last name right. Is it Yip?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Okay, great. Mr. and Mrs. Whip, thank you very much for all the materials that you sent. They are very informative. And I totally hear you on your issues. And I have, a few follow-up questions. But first, I will let Mr. Buck from Bureau Urban Forestry reply to a couple of the questions that was directed to him. So please, Mr. Buck.
Great, thank you. This is Chris Buck with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. Just repeating that again for people who may have joined us. Again, I could sense that there's been a lot of maintenance over the years, and that's why I wanted to look at Google Street View so that you would feel like, staff are, the department at large understands what's been going on over the years. So a couple of things to clarify. Actually, I love the outdoors and nature and all that. And of course, my own daughter has like histamines in her system more than I do. So any mosquito bite she gets is like this big red blotch for several days, and she gets a whole bunch at night. And it's almost a year-round thing, like even last week. So I completely understand the challenge of, wanting to protect your family. In general, I'm not aware of a connection between, trees harboring mosquitoes. I know it tends to be water, standing water. And believe me, I look in my yard, my neighbor's yard, trying to think like, where's all the standing water? Why do we have so many mosquitoes? But it's not. And I think one of the reasons why it could have been the health department maybe never came back is because there's not a connection as far as I'm aware with that. Sometimes we have people complain about bees or other insects. So the challenge, I think the overall challenge here is that, there's the perception of what a tree should be overall in size sounds like a challenge, in terms of like the amount of light that's coming through. And I do want to thank you because you clearly are listening closely, and it is true. 311, we just want folks to call 311. That's the takeaway. It sounds like you've done a lot of calling and attempts to call the right people in the past. If you've called 311 in the past, you've called PG&E and you've had them out, and you've even clearly reached our department because it sounds like you were told, hey, we have a schedule and it's not going to be for a few years. The reason that PG&E and then Public Works has not been coming out to maintain the tree is that, again, from a tree manager's perspective, there was nothing, again, with the exception of when you called PG&E and you're saying like, we're getting flickering, that would be a time for PG&E to do something, but there's no need for Public Works or PG&E to be out there simply to keep this tree at a reduced size. And so I think that's where we respectfully kind of, where we go one way, and, you're hiring the contractor. We will definitely follow up with the contractor because it really is up to anyone performing work in a public right of way to be current with the guidelines or requirements of that municipality, that city. So for example, 22 years ago when I worked for PG&E for San Mateo County, there's 12 towns or cities within San Mateo County. And I had this binder. If I'm in Half Moon Bay or if I'm in San Carlos or Belmont, I have specific guidelines I need to follow. So for tree companies in the Bay Area, they might, they might be crossing the bridge each day, going to different towns. They really need to have a relationship with the city so that when a property owner reaches out to them and says, this is what we want, they can educate you and say, okay, these are the challenges, because we may not be able to do all this other work because it may be excessive or it may cross the guidelines. And so really the takeaway here is I hear the frustration, and I would say it's calling 311. And it's also, unfortunately, it does come back to a consumer protection issue where this contractor needs to know what our rules are and they need to be following them. And, we've looked at how our code might be able to be modified in the future so that we can take a more direct approach to the contractor and not the property owner. But unfortunately, as the property owner, it sort of defaults back to a property owner issue with a consumer. But I really respect everything you've shared. I feel your frustration. And again, these aren't perfect systems, and we're always trying to learn better and make an improvement to how we can provide that information to the public.
So I have a question. I think earlier, the first case you had, or we had, you were saying that I can actually call the city, you guys, Chris department, to come out, meet the contractor and say, okay, we're going to do X, Y, and Z pre-approved, something like that. Is that what I should do if I need to?
Correct. But it typically has to be for a compelling reason. So examples are, again, painting a house, having a roof repaired where there's canopy that is physically preventing a contractor from being able to perform work. What we do is we look at our schedule. Most likely we wouldn't be there in time. And so we recognize there are moments in time when a property owner does need some clearance from their home in order to carry out the work. But typically most of that work, scaffolding, painting houses, new roofs, all that typically can be done without doing too much interference with the tree. So the challenge is if we come out and look at the tree and we say, well, we actually don't believe this tree needs to be pruned, that's always a lengthy conversation, right? Because it's one of a property owner's desire and perception of what a tree should be in an urban environment with the city's goals of, wanting to maximize the canopy. I will say that we look very closely at the types of trees we plant beneath power lines. And every year we review what species are allowed to be planted beneath power lines so that we can avoid these types of conflicts. We have a lot of different species out there now. So we're kind of stuck here wanting to maintain that tree as much as possible, but essentially kind of limiting it up in that secondary power line range. That's kind of where we are right now.
So just to kind of to follow up, if I'm not misunderstanding Mr. Yip, I was asking for like the next time that he needs or want to trim the tree, and that obviously is before buff or the forestry scheduled to come out, right? Because I mentioned this tree, especially now that it's been pruned this way so many times, it's growing fast. So we believe they're foreseeing a similar issue in the not so distant future. So what I'm understanding is they want to know exactly what they should be doing to do things, above board. And call 311 is the first stop, I understand. My question is there a need for a permit to prune the trees? How long does it take? How much it costs? Kind of like not too much detail, but just
Sure. I'll keep it brief. So yeah, again, calling 311, and also An example, let's say the customers called us out there and there was one particular branch that was making contact with the service drop to their home where the electricity is coming in. You know, we would concede to say, you know what, you could prune this one branch specifically. The overall tree will continue to grow, but if you wish to prune this one branch, this is something we would allow you to do with a private contractor who is a certified arborist. That's an example of when we would come out and try to meet in the middle ground of like what the specific issue is. There is no permit per se at this point in time, because the message really is the city. This is, if there's really a need to prune that tree, it's the city's responsibility to do that. Again, we would typically send our own crew if there was an issue with the single branch and a power line and or undue strain or abrasion. So that's one
Right.
example.
Well, then, the follow-up
yeah.
to that is if there's no permit needed, then does the public need expressed written permission to, you know, prune a particular tree, or do they have to provide documentation like pictures of the issue, or do they just let you know, hey, you know, I need to prune this tree because of X, Y, Z. I'm going to use a licensed contractor or, you know, a licensed arborist, sorry. This is information and that's it, you know? So there's
Sure.
two
So,
different, yeah.
yeah, I think the message is for property owners to call 311. When there's a specific, I guess these are all, it's such a common inquiry. The bottom line is the city maintains all the trees and the property owners should forget about trying to maintain trees on their own. Don't do it. We don't want you to do it. We don't want people to have these issues with consumers, with the contractors they hire. The message is not to prune the tree. If there's clearly a conflict, like, hey, you know, this is a year we want to paint the house, we're really going to we anticipate, you know, needing to prune a couple of branches. They do need to call 311, reach out to the city and get permission from us to do that. And it requires us to visit the site. We want to meet with a homeowner to understand why they need to prune the tree, what those pruning objectives are, but also review on site with the contractor and literally physically look at the tree together to say, these are the branches you can prune and this is how far back to prune them. We literally will use a laser pointer and make sure that we're all on the same page so that when the tree is pruned, there's no surprise like the previous customer who had arrived at home and discovered, wow, this contractor pruned the tree before we even met on site. So the message is not to prune your trees. Don't prune your trees. Call the city, call 311. We will sort of listen closely to what the customer is saying, try to understand their concerns. And there are exceptions and cases when we will allow a property owner to prune a tree with a qualified arborist. So permission is required to be obtained from Public Works, but it's not through a permit system. It's just through contacting us and reaching our department.
Okay. Okay, just to reiterate for everybody then, there's going to be some collaboration between Grove by Forestry and the customer and the contractor, I mean the arborist, hopefully, in limited cases where there is some kind of exigent circumstance where we need to take some action over the tree. However, regular maintenance is to be left up to the city to take care of. Is that my understanding? Now, a follow-up question to that. I'm sorry if I'm taking too much of everybody's time, but I feel these are important. As we've seen earlier, the city is doing its best to get to every tree, but of course has to prioritize based on risk factors, size and so on. So for this particular case, the owner would see the city come over 3 to 4 years out. Now there's a lot of growth that can happen in 3 to 4 years. Has the owner or the public have to wait before it really becomes a safety issue before calling 311? Or can it kind of, basically from a perfectly good tree, then it start to grow too much, becoming sort of a little nuisance, right? A little problem. But they can see where this is going, right? Do they have to wait before until something happen before the city's the city's called, or can they preemptively? I think a lot of people are feeling that kind of situation where they're trying to do the right thing, but time marches on and streets are living things, right? So what's the public to do?
That's great questions. So to be clear, one of the things that will happen, regardless of the schedule, is our urban forestry inspectors who are certified arborists. They visit hundreds of trees a week. So we actually get, on any given month, hundreds of 311 calls, and we go actually inspect these sites because Public Works absolutely wants to be responsive to the public, and we definitely want to address public safety concerns. So that's one of the things that we're really focused on, is responding to these 311 calls. And the good news for everyone involved is the Director of Public Works or interim director, the mayor, and many other city service managers monitor how many service requests we get each month, how long they stayed open before we respond to them. So I think there's the good news is that the customers that call 311, they're not needing to wait 3 or 4 years to get a response. We will definitely get out there right away and work with the customer to listen to their concerns and try to address their concerns. Because there are, 50% of the time, off the top of my head, the concerns might be something that don't require maintenance at this time. But we can provide education and additional information about what we see out there. So I do want to assure the public that we get calls all the time. There are times when people do need to prune the tree, and we have a mechanism for that, but it really starts with not touching the trees and just calling 311 when you have a concern, and we will work with you to address that. Oop, and I think, David, I think you're muted.
Sorry, yes. Okay, thank you for that. This is more of a curiosity of mine, but you have mentioned earlier that that PG&E has this very expensive survey tree and maintenance program, and I was wondering if they do share the goods with the Bureau of Urban Forestry as far as the these tree surveys, because right now you have your people going out survey tree, and some information might be available. Just wondering from a purely inquisitive.
Sure. So yeah, Chris Buck with Public Works. So we all pay for the service. It's definitely in our monthly utility bills that we pay to PG&E for vegetation management programs across the state. So I do know by law, the PUC requires any electrical provider to inspect their facilities once a year, and they will prune the trees that are getting near the electrical conductors that concern them. So the good news is the public is largely unaware of these annual inspections that PG&E performs. And so that's why I can state with some certainty that if PG&E has an issue with what they see out there, they typically will take action, because otherwise they would be noticed through their annual inspections. So they're looking at this literally once a year. We know that they're doing that. There are sites like a palm tree beneath high voltage lines. We will get reached out to by PG&E, like when there's a really extreme public safety concern. Their vegetation management inspectors will reach out to our department. So we do have a relationship, not necessarily with their schedule exactly, but with the field representatives who inspect the equipment. And when they see an issue, they actually do reach out to us. So there is communication that occurs, but I would say there's literally just a handful of cases each year where they actually reach out to us. And those are really extreme fire hazards, like a palm tree contacting high voltage lines.
Okay. So there's no systematic sharing information. Okay.
Yeah,
I was
it's
just
really
wondering.
just they reach out to us if they see an issue. And then I just want to assure the public that these facilities are inspected once a year by law. And I was, 20 years ago, I was part of that same process. So nothing's changed. If anything, there's even more scrutiny on utilities to inspect their facilities every year.
Sure. Thank you very much. I believe Mr. Yip has one last question. But before that question, let's have him unmuted, please, Ceres. And Mr. Yip, if you can let me know. See if he's unmuted. Muted.
Yes, just a moment. I'm trying to get.
Oh,
him.
sure.
Mr. Yip, are you able to hear us and to unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Mr. Rayla, I believe you can do it if I'm unable to. If you go to his
Okay.
name and then unmute
Sure.
him.
Yeah, and I would take this chance to also ask Mrs. Yip for any material pertaining the inquiry on the health department regarding the mosquitoes. If they can send it to you or me, that'd be great. Let's see. Sorry, I'm also don't do this too often. So let me get to. Okay, all right. So I have that, and then.
Actually, Mr. Buck, you have the capability as host, I see listed now. So can you unmute? It's going to be under the first name Kelvin.
Sure, let's go.
And I lost my connection for a moment and came back. So if you could also make me a host or co-host, that's why I lost my capabilities.
Okay, let me see. Okay, I put you back as host, Ceres.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe, so let's see if that will.
And so now I can, yeah.
Oh, great.
Let's see. Yeah, thank you for that. Sorry, it pushed me out and then now I'm back in. Okay. Mr. Yip, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I think I'm on mute right now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
I do have a question because I have gone through all of this. I called 311 and there were all kinds of buttons to press. Press 1 for parking violation, press 2 for something else. There was never, I explained my situation. There was no button for the urban register, the forestry. they told me that just to call 911.
That's exactly what I got too.
I
tried to
know
call
they
911.
they told me to call 911. Honestly, it's not like a 911. I mean, I mean, it was touching the power line. But I guess you guys need to like how to modify the system to let me aware of like some kind of button to press. And because you keep saying call 311, really, there's no other channel for me to reach you guys. And they told me to call 911. That was what I got.
Well, I see
Okay.
this email now. I can Department of Forestry, right? I can actually email Chris directly and ask him, hey, I got this. I think based on what David was saying, I can just contact that email alias and see what you can say about the tree, right? Is that how it goes?
Yes, and I did also put our information in the chat as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I scroll up and I see that now.
So-
urbanforestry@sfdwp.org. Okay.
So that
Okay.
was what I had. Yes, I did call. There was no. I explained the situation about the tree, and they said, "Well, just call 911."
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's there, Mr. Yippee. You mentioned you have one last question.
No, I
Yeah,
think that's
that's
it.
it.
Of course, the one last thing I want to say is pruning a tree, yes. Licensed contractor, yes. Malicious intent, no. So
Of
about my
course.
fine, please. I
That's what we're here
think
for.
that's all I want to say, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Understood. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you. And I just want to remind everybody, once your item is closed, feel free to stick around or leave if you need to. No need to stay for the whole hearing if you don't want to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I will close this item and move to the final. Final item, hearing order 205668. To consider revision to the public work regulation implementing the requirements of Resistant Public Works Code Article 27, contained in Public Works Order number 18097, which I believe is concerning antennas. Sorry, not antennas. Is there a specific SMF, I think. Can I have Public Works make this presentation? I believe there'll be Mr. Flashes Halterio.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Good morning. My name is Leo Palacios, and I'm from Public Works Bureau of Street Use and Mapping. We called a hearing today to adopt revisions to Public Works Order 188097, in which Public Works implemented Article 27 of the Public Works Code. Public Works Article 27 regulates the installation of surface mounted facilities in the public right-of-way. Article 27 was intended to provide a process for private entities and city departments to install large boxes in the public right-of-way. Since Article 27 was adopted in 2014, Public Works has issued 83 surface mounted facility permits. Recently, wireless care.
Excuse me, Mr. Palacios, I'm so sorry. Did you need to share your screen at this time? Because I need to promote you to panelists if that's.
No need to share.
Oh, okay. Okay, excuse me, the interruption.
No worries. Since Article 27 was adopted in 2014, Public Works has issued 83 surface mounted facility permits. Recently, the wireless carriers have approached Public Works about installing standalone poles in the public right-of-way for wireless facilities. Wireless carriers seek to install these poles on streets where there are existing overhead facilities, which are PG&E poles, but PG&E has determined it would be unsafe to add wireless facilities to these poles. Under California state law, telephone companies may install poles in the public right-of-way for their infrastructure. Public Works is proposing revisions to Public Works Order 188097 to clarify that standalone poles for personal wireless service facilities are surface mounted facilities, as that term is defined in Article 27 to implement processing, design, and placement criteria for these standalone poles. Due to the size of these facilities, Article 27 in Public Works Order 188097 established an extension pre-application location approval process. Due to the small footprint these standalone poles would have, in contrast to other surface mounted facilities, Public Works is proposing a new process for applying for waivers of the location approval process generally required for surface mounted facilities. The changes are the result of a collaborative effort between Public Works, the Planning Department, and the Recreation and Parks Department. Those agencies have helped Public Works develop design and the placement criteria that will limit the aesthetic impact of these standalone poles. Due to requirements of federal law, Public Works has proposed a process that would allow Public Works to issue a final decision on an application for a surface mounted facility site permit for a standalone pole within 90 days. Finally, the revision to the order include requirements and conditions to protect public safety, a paramount concern that we take very seriously. An applicant is required to submit a radio frequency emission report and a noise study signed by a professional registered engineer of their proposed equipment. These reports will be reviewed by the Department of Public Health for compliance with the FCC radio frequency exposure level and the city noise ordinance. The applicant must also submit a verified statement from a registered engineer demonstrating the structural integrity of the installation. So the purpose of this hearing is to provide a forum for stakeholders and members of the public to make comments to the revision. And we ask that the hearing officer that you give us up to the max 5 days just to review any comments submitted today so that we can advise you whether Public Works agrees that the director should include these revisions in the final order. That's it.
Understood. Thank you. Well, is there any member of the public who would like to speak on behalf regarding this item? And if you could please raise your hand while we try to
Yes,
get you unmuted.
we have Melanie Sengupta.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Great. Good morning, Hearing Officer Rayla.
Morning.
I'm speaking on behalf of Verizon Wireless. We submitted a letter yesterday, which includes our comments in writing. Did you receive that letter? We sent it to the SMF email address.
I believe I might.
All comments, hello, hearing officer, this is Leo, Public Works. All comments were submitted to the folder for the public hearing of today's item. It should be
Okay,
under
so
the
I
order.
have it in my stack.
You have it in your stack. Great. We have no additional comments on top of our written comments, which we've submitted.
Okay, thank
Thank
you. Next, any other member of the public? Again, please raise your hand so we can find you and unmute you.
And if you're dialing in and you would like to raise your hand, press *9 and then *6 to unmute. I don't see any other hands at this time.
Yeah, I'll give it 1 more minute just because, technology. Yeah. See, 11:37. They should have be easier way to find the button. I think on a computer is easier. On mobile, a little bit less intuitive. All right, let's see. Nobody, huh?
No other hands at this time.
All right. I have the department then. if it has anything else to add. But I'm guessing not, since there was no member of the public. Mr. Palacios, do you have anything else to add?
No further comments, Hearing Officer.
All right. Still no hand raised, right? Serious?
No hands.
All right, I will move to close this item then. And with that, close the hearing. Thank you very much. I will now make, well, I will consider all the evidence for this hearing, all the testimonies, and will then make my recommendations to the director. That's it. The hearing is now closed. Thank you for your participation.